The sun had already set, casting long shadows across the empty streets of the city. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze were the only sounds filling the air. On the corner of Fifth and Pine, an elderly black man, John Carter, was sitting on the sidewalk, trying to catch his breath. His wrinkled face, once filled with warmth and kindness, now bore the marks of pain and confusion. His body was slumped, bruised, and bloodied, a stark contrast to the man who had once been a proud, respected figure in his community. John had lived a long life, one filled with challenges and triumphs. He had been a father, a husband, a friend, and a mentor. But none of that seemed to matter now as he sat alone in the darkness, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect him. His clothes were torn, his hair matted with sweat, and his hands shook as he tried to hold onto the small amount of dignity he had left. It all started earlier that afternoon when John had gone out for his routine walk. He had always enjoyed these walks, a way for him to clear his mind and stay active despite his age. But that day, something was different. A confrontation had occurred, one that would change everything. John had been walking down the street when a police car pulled up beside him. He wasn't sure what had caught their attention, but before he knew it, two officers had jumped out of the vehicle and approached him. The officers were young, maybe in their mid-20s, and their eyes were filled with suspicion as they sized him up. "Can I help you, officers?" John had asked, trying to remain calm, though he felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had lived long enough to know that being an older black man in a predominantly white neighborhood could sometimes raise unnecessary attention, but he never thought it would escalate like this. The officers didn't respond immediately. Instead, they looked him over, their eyes scanning every inch of him, as if trying to find something to justify their presence. They began questioning him, demanding to know where he was coming from and where he was going. John, confused and tired, answered as best as he could, explaining that he was just out for a walk. But the officers were having none of it. "Step over here, sir," one of the officers barked, his voice stern and commanding. "We need to check you out." John hesitated for a moment. He knew what was about to happen. He had seen the headlines, heard the stories of others who looked like him, treated like criminals without reason. His heart pounded in his chest, and his instincts screamed at him to walk away, but he didn't. "Is there a problem, officer?" John asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I've done nothing wrong." But the officers weren't listening. They moved toward him quickly, one grabbing his arm, pulling him roughly away from the sidewalk. John, who had never been in a situation like this before, felt a surge of fear course through him. He tried to pull back, to resist, but the officer's grip was firm, and the next thing he knew, he was being thrown to the ground. The pain was excruciating. He could feel the gravel and concrete tearing into his skin as the officers pinned him down. He struggled to breathe, to fight back, but his body, old and frail, was no match for their strength. The world around him seemed to spin as he heard one of the officers shouting orders, and the other began to handcuff him with unnecessary force. "Stop resisting," one officer yelled, though John hadn't done anything to resist. "I'm not resisting." John gasped, trying to explain, but his voice was drowned out by the sounds of cuffs being clicked into place. The next few moments felt like a blur. The officers continued to shout at him, accusing him of things he didn't understand. It wasn't until they had finished handcuffing him that they finally realized their mistake. And even then, it was too late. They shoved him aside like an afterthought, leaving him there on the cold, unforgiving ground. John lay there for what seemed like an eternity, his mind reeling. What had just happened? Why had they done this to him? He couldn't comprehend it. His body ached, his head spun, and he was left alone in the street with no one around to help.